Welcome everybody to our webinar today on with Diarra Diop. She is joining us from the Geneva Advocacy Office, where she is the Child Rights Advocacy Advisor. She joined Save the Children in May 2011, and she coordinates our work on child rights advocacy towards the United Nations human rights mechanisms in Geneva, in particular the Human Rights Council, with a thematic focus on child rights governance and child protection. She's currently leading Save the Children's global advocacy towards the UN Universal Periodic Review in collaboration with the Child Rights Governance Initiative, and coordinates advocacy on children on the move and investment in children towards the Human Rights Council. She has built a substantial knowledge of the UN human rights and child rights machinery, including as part of her previous role in the International Federation for Human Rights, which is a human rights NGO, and has experience working in not only the UN but also in the EU agencies within the postal sector and the social policy research. Diarra has a Master's of Science in Human Rights from the University of College Dublin and a Master's in Politics and International Relations from Toulouse. So Diarra, welcome. Welcome to our webinar. This is part of the Open University Save the Children Advocacy and Campaign Training course. Thank you so much for your time. We've got a pretty packed agenda today, and we're going to have a lot of initial discussions about kind of some of the importance of these mechanisms. The title of this webinar is using regional and international mechanisms, and I've had quite a few people asking me, what do we mean by that? So in your introduction, we spotted a couple of them. But do you want to just give us a little overview about what you mean by regional and international mechanisms?
Sure, thank you, Shani. Maybe the first thing to say about these international and regional mechanisms is actually their diversity. We work with a whole range of institutions, multilateral institutions, political bodies, mechanisms, at the regional and the international level, whose decisions have a direct and indirect impact on children. And that's why we are actually using those mechanisms to try to achieve sustainable change for children. The United Nations is of course one of the well-known bodies that we are targeting, and in itself it's a very, very broad body, because it includes also a lot of intergovernmental bodies, specialized UN agencies, and working on different issues. So really the diversity, because they have different mandates, broad mandates like the UN General Assembly, for example, or the Human Rights Council that look at a whole range of issues. Not only children's rights, but also other issues, but also other institutions that have a thematic focus, such as the World Health Assembly, for example, that is more looking specifically at health. Other organizations like the International Organization for Migration, based in Geneva, which is looking specifically at the issue of migration, or the UN Office Commissioner for Refugee, which is looking at refugees. So we'll see really a whole range of institutions that we engage with at different levels, so at the international and regional level. But what these bodies have in common is really that they have been established by states, and they provide a platform for states to discuss, negotiate, and to monitor also the implementation of agreements between states at the international and regional level.
So basically, accountability mechanisms. I mean, is it about standards, or is it about accountability, or is it a mixture of both?
It's actually a mixture of both, really. When we say accountability, of course, our role as Save the Children, accountability is central, because we want to make sure that when states make political commitments, at these different in these different fora that they are held to account. And this is the role of civil society, partly, but and Save the Children, to make sure that they are held to account on their commitment to children. So some mechanisms have been set up in the UN with actually a specific purpose to monitor and hold states accountable. There are different examples in the module that you will see, but one of these bodies, for example, is the Committee on the Rights of the Child, which is an expert body which is looking at states' compliance with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And there are other bodies as well that have a more political mandate, like the Human Rights Council in Geneva, for example, although the UNGA. And what we're trying to do through these mechanisms is really to make sure that all the commitments made are followed through, and we can really see an impact also at the national level.
Great.
Yeah.
So, Diarra, I mean, these are a lot of organizations and entities you've just listed off, and that's only just an example of what are many more. Explain to us a little bit about the role of Save the Children's Global Advocacy Offices and engaging with some of these entities, and then also kind of how do the members engage, or how do country offices also themselves engage with those entities? So give us a little bit of an overview of how does the structure work. Let's talk specifically about the Committee on the Rights of the Child. What is the role of the advocacy officers, members, country officers in that engagement?
Okay, so if we look at specifically at the committee on the rights of the child, we engage with the committee at different levels. A lot of that engagement is, of course, with supporting country offices and members in submitting reports, alternative reports that will be actually feeding into a review by the committee of state obligations. So, for example, when there is a review of a specific country, let's say, I don't know, Sweden, for example, then we will have, a calendar of events, and we know that there will be a review taking place at a specific date. And for that process, there are a number of reports that are produced for that review. So there is, of course, the state report, where they have to actually report on how they have implemented their obligations. But then there is also an opportunity for civil society to engage and to produce an alternative report. So at Save the Children, we work a lot with coalitions in different countries, where we can actually track, implementation of the convention, and we can produce a comprehensive report on how these obligations have been implemented. So basically, what we will do is use this report then to feed into the review, and also support country offices and members to actually engage directly also with the committee during pre-sessions. So it's basically an advocacy moment before the actual review, where civil society can present their key concerns and recommendations and priorities to the committee, so they can take these into account when reviewing the state under review during the session. So this will be, the pre-session. A lot of country office members will come in Geneva, because the committee sessions are in Geneva, to meet with the committee and present their key issues of concern and recommendations based on their alternative report, as I mentioned before. So that will be one key stage. And then, of course, another important phase is the implementation and the follow-up. So we are also supporting country office and to actually have a clear follow-up strategy on how to implement the concluding observations from the Committee on the Rights of the Child, for example.
Excellent. And listeners, please feel free to type or ask any questions, unmute yourselves, or if you've got any good examples or any questions that you may have for Diarra as we discuss. It doesn't have to be just Diarra and I speaking here. We'd love to have your participation. So, Diarra, that's quite a complex system, and it sounds like there's a lot of back and forth between yourselves and the global advocacy offices and those countries. This isn't something that a country's doing every year, though, is it?
No, of course. So there is basically a process where states are, they have to report to the committee. So it's a rolling process. So basically every, I don't know specifically for the committee, but for the Universal Periodic Review, which is a similar accountability mechanism, they have to report every 4 years and a half. So we will have an opportunity to actually make a submission or an alternative report around a specific session, and then between two sessions, it will be really important to track the implementation of the recommendations or the concluding observations from the committee.
Okay, and I'm going to come back to that, but I also just wanted to let listeners know that we have Esther and Olivia from the Brussels Advocacy Office on the line, and they manage our relationship with the European Union. So, Esther, Olivia, if you are online, if you'd like to just say a few words about the European Union and your role and the work that you do with countries and members, that'd be great here.
Yeah. So from our perspective, the process is a bit different, but I'll give some examples which might be very more representative. So, for example, we work a lot on specific humanitarian cases where we work then with our country office and members to engage towards the EU to achieve some specific advocacy objectives, for example, on South Sudan, on Syria now, on Central African Republic, on the Ebola crisis now. And then we also have specific EU tools which affect some country offices. So, for example, we have specific funding country strategies. So those are 5-7 years strategies from the European Commission in a specific country. And so we work with also the partnership units on this, to work with the Commission to make sure that the strategy is implemented, to follow up with the Commission on the implementation, but also on the next action plans. Next to this, the EU delegations in the countries also have human rights strategies. Those are confidential, so it's not always easy to get a hold of them, but we try somehow to, when it's possible, to work with the country office to make sure that children's rights are included in those human rights strategies. And then we also have, for example, the Human Rights Action Plan, which encompasses some specific objectives and actions on, for example, child marriage, and there they have specific focus countries, for example, Yemen, and so we worked with our Yemen country office to make sure that the EU delivers on these actions with Yemen. So I don't know if you have others.
Maybe also kind of like wrapping up what Olivia said. So as you can listen from the presentation, we are targeting the EU at different levels as a donor. Is an important humanitarian and development donor. So trying to make sure that part of this aid as well is targeting children at different levels. We are also targeting the EU as a political actor, particularly when it comes to human rights. They also set policies that they apply in their own relations with third countries. And what Olivia mentioned about the Human Rights Action Plan, this is one of our main priorities these days, because I think it's going to set a lot about how the EU will engage with third countries on human rights issues. And this is one of the areas, particularly when it comes to specific countries, where we've supported our country offices in their local dialogues as well. And there is a third aspect, which maybe would, would deserve another webinar if you agree, but the EU is a legislator as well. It sets as well more than policy standards. It sets norms, particularly for internally within the EU, that can affect children. And there the process is even a bit more complex because we need to engage with different stakeholders. So we engage with the institutions in Brussels, but we do engage as well through our members with the member states and their governments. And we also engage with our elected institution, which is the European Parliament. And particularly on the area of asylum, which affects particularly children, the EU has a quite prominent role. And so this, we can call it children on the move. We do engage as well. But the legislative role, let's say, is different from the donor and the political. But it's also a part of, the kind of mechanisms that the EU can have to promote and protect child rights. And maybe just to end, in the treaties funding the European Union, namely the Lisbon Treaty, the protection of the rights of the child is one of the specific aims of the European Union. So there's a legal obligation as well to protect the rights of the child, both internally and externally. So that's it.
Excellent. Thanks, Esther and Olivia, for that. That was very helpful. I also just want to let people know, listeners know, that we also have an advocacy office in New York, and they manage our relationship with the UN General Assembly and the UN Secretary General. The last of our 4 advocacy offices is based in Addis Ababa, where it represents Save the Children to the African Union. So when we talk about what the webinar is, which is looking at regional and international mechanism, we have a huge spectrum of organizations and entities that we're talking about here, from the very global UN entities down to the very specific regional and thematic entities, some of which Diarra has touched on them. Again, if anybody has questions on any of these organizations, entities, or any specific questions to Esther and Olivia as well as Diarra, feel free to type them in or to unmute yourself and to ask any questions. I'm going to come back to you, Diarra, but Esther and Olivia, if you've got any contributions to the questions I'm asking Diarra, please do feel free to engage. The conversation is always richer when more people are part of that. So, everybody has given us a long list of organizations and mechanisms and entities that exist. Are they effective for us? Are we seeing success in our ambition to be able to deliver impact for children by utilizing this? Do we have some good case studies or good examples of where this has been effective? And thereafter, the harder question is, do we have some lessons learned of where we have not being able to have success in this? So first, let's talk successes. Where's this been effective? Diarra.
Yeah, I think these basically these mechanisms are very effective in terms of reinforcing advocacy efforts that are already ongoing at national level, for example. So it's more, complementary tool that can be used to actually, build more pressure on the government and also hold governments to account, as I mentioned before. So we have some examples on how we have used those mechanisms to build momentum around specific issues. A good example, for example, is the one project which is called the Local to Global Advocacy project, which is specifically on maternal and child health in specific countries: Afghanistan, India, Zambia, and Yemen. And basically the aim of this project is to make sure that there is a clear link between impact on the field and advocacy at local, national, regional and international levels. So basically we ensure those linkages by using also local champions working on child health in those countries, and specifically Zambia, to then actually reinforce those messages at the international level. So in the case of Zambia, there was a local champion from a district, specifically working on the district health office in one of the districts in Zambia, who was invited to participate, to come in Geneva and actually share his experience and do advocacy towards the missions in Geneva and as part of the Human Rights Council session to really show what is happening on the ground, and also another level was to actually engage also this local champion at the regional level, also in the Pan-African Feed for Children in Addis Ababa the same year. So really using these different levels to push through the same message, the same advocacy message, and actually this was quite helpful in terms of reaching our advocacy objective in that regard, which was to increase budgetary allocations to maternal and child health in Zambia. So this was quite a clear ask that was made by this local champion, and also through other activities, including the Universal Periodic Review, where the country office in Zambia, together with partners, have also highlighted this ask in their submission. We were also able to push through this and achieve this objective by an increase in budgetary allocation. So I think this is an example where we can actually use different mechanisms, not only at the international level, but also at the regional level, and to use them, in a holistic approach, I would say, use them to reinforce each other and push through the same message again to build more momentum. So this is one example. Also, maybe another example on the Universal Periodic Review, which was a specific example actually on child participation, because it's one of the, I would say, success really that we are really proud to have been able to actually support and contribute. So that was in the case there was the Universal Periodic Review of Albania, and so our country office actually supported children from that were part of child-led groups in different regions of Albania. They supported, together with World Vision, to actually draft their own submission. So it was a child-led report, child-led submission to the UPR of Albania. And they have also engaged in advocacy at the local level and at the national level with the different embassies that are based in Tirana to try and get their message across and make sure that their key issues of concern are reflected in the UPR of Albania and the recommendations. And then we also supported and facilitated the participation in Geneva in a meeting with state representatives, where they also highlighted their key concerns. And actually that was quite a success, because they were very, very very empowered, articulate, and actually made a very good impression on the state representatives, who are usually a bit skeptical about child participation in these mechanisms, because they are usually quite child unfriendly. But with a lot of preparation and also children who are already advocates in their own country can actually make a difference and engage with these mechanisms. So in that case, we actually achieved concrete outcomes also with the key issues that children raised in their own country with embassies, and in Geneva with the missions and the state representatives. They were reflected in the UPR recommendations, and actually for the first time also in the UPR process, the issue of child participation itself was raised as an issue of concern in Albania. And the state also acknowledged that there should be more consultation with children, and this is an issue that they took back after the UPR. The government, they took this issue back at the national level, and they organized a big consultation involving children to actually make sure that their issues are also reflected in policies and in the policy-making process in Albania. So this is a concrete example where this has, engagement with mechanisms have had an impact. Of course, there are challenges. There are weaknesses of these mechanisms, including the fact that it is actually difficult to track, to follow up on recommendations, or when an issue is on the agenda. Also, it's difficult to actually make sure that there is follow-up action at the national level. But I think one way to address this is also to make sure that there are clear follow-up plans that are developed at the early stage into the advocacy strategy for engaging with these mechanisms.
So, a lot of your work is very dependent on countries and members doing a lot of preparatory work. You're talking about the child participation, you're talking about alternative reports, as well as a lot of the post-follow-up work, which is, once the recommendations are there, actually engaging the government to make sure that they're implementing those recommendations, meeting with stakeholders at a national level. And so it's something that I think, from my experience, countries really have to plan very far in advance for each of these different mechanisms. What would you say would be some of the kind of low-hanging fruit, or the easier things that every country office should have at the top of their minds when they think about regional international mechanisms? Is it that they should know the time frame for the alternative reports? Is it that they should be aware of which government representative will be at the UN General Assembly? What are some of those? I've given you some examples. Tell me if they were right or not. But any others that you have for countries, so that they, some of the bits and pieces that they can at least try and put into play.
Yeah, some of these, mechanisms, they have quite, regular sessions, and it's, you can predict more or less when they will be, when they will have, reviews, for example, in Geneva or in other places. So, it can be, first of all, a good idea to actually have, these dates in mind, with a calendar of key advocacy opportunities that are coming up. If, for example, the Human Rights Council, they have 3 sessions per year, and they have also a program of work which is usually standard, regular work program that is repeated over years. Of course, there are new issues coming up as well, but some of the mechanisms and discussions are actually can be predictable. So, it's actually good to have those in mind and try to to also link them to opportunities at national level. Make sure that actually the outcome also of the outcome documents of these events, are used, how we can tap into those and how we can link them to national events, activities, and objectives. So, I mean, for example, using the UPR recommendations, for example, in national advocacy plans would be to also look at what are the key events at national level that we can use to actually bring those recommendations up and maintain the momentum around them. For example, there is the Child Rights Day every year, and we can actually use that as an opportunity to again remind the government of the commitments they have made in a political fora. So, I mean, these are ways to do it. But of course, I think, for country offices and members, the advocacy office also are a good resource to get informed, about these opportunities and events that are coming up. And this is our role, basically, as advocacy office, to identify these opportunities, spot them, and to inform the country office and the members that they are coming up and that we can actually use them to shape, the political agenda.
That's great. Esther, Olivia, do you have any kind of low-hanging fruits or tips for countries and members on engagement with the European Union? Similar to what Diarra just said.
Well, if we have,
I know, guys.
1 billion, No, I think the challenge with the EU it still remains fairly unknown, I would say, even within European Union countries and abroad. Well, but having said that, it's true that in some countries where we work, particularly outside the EU does play a quite significant role, as I said, both as a donor and as a political actor. So I think the advice, and as Diarra and Olivia is doing that, is helping the country offices to engage on the EU, to engage with the EU based on a strategic analysis where, it's a key important actor. We are seeing that, for instance, in Yemen, it's a key important actor, maybe because other donors are not present. Or in countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, when it comes to human rights and child rights, the EU is locally quite engaged with civil society to promote this kind of a dialogue. So the role that we can play is supporting country offices in doing this analysis, and maybe Olivia can...
No, I think our role is also to show what's the added value of the EU in our countries.
Yes.
And so from my experience, when the country offices know and see what the added value of our work, of our advocacy office work, and of the EU in general can be, then it's easier for them to engage also. It's clearer what they can achieve.
Yeah. And also to add to that is that, again, in some countries, EU delegations are very keen on engaging with civil society, grassroots organizations, local NGOs, but also international NGOs as well. We tend to have credibility as well, good knowledge of the local context. So we need to take this opportunity as well of the EU eagerness to engage with us.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that from Brussels. I think from New York, they would probably say, you should try and find out who would be representing your country at the General Assembly. What are some of their policies that they'll be taking forward? What are some of the decisions? I think within the African Union, they meet twice a year. There's a lot of activity there. I know recently on early marriage, as well as a huge agenda on maternal and child health. Knowing what are the discussions there, how are you able to use those platforms to not only bring awareness of the issue, but also use it as a tacit platform to engage with country leadership and use almost a little bit of peer pressure to say, well, this is a success some countries have had in X, Y, and Z. We should be thinking about making similar investments, such as in education and health, emergency response, all of that type of work. So a lot of opportunities there, and the module goes through a couple of these things, but of course it's a very long list, and depending on which region you're in, depending on the type of government that you're working with, they'll be responding, it seems, differently to different opportunities. If they have EU funding, there's a great opportunity with the Brussels Advocacy Office. If there's an active civil society that can work on an alternative report, that's excellent with the Human Rights Committee or the Committee on the Rights of the Child. You know, if it's more regional focus, then you've got things like the African Union, ASEAN in Asia, in Latin America, they've got a number of very strong regional entities that work at play there. For Save the Children, we have our 4 global advocacy offices, but then we also have our regional offices that often engage with many of these regional mechanisms. So I just want to ask listeners to take a look at the module, see what it has there, but also reach out to the advocacy offices if you have questions, because things are constantly changing. And I think Esther and Olivia and Diarra will agree that, you know, they spend a lot of their time just keeping on top of all of the different processes and timeframes and agendas that are being developed in this. So in the last few minutes of our discussion here, Diarra, any last thoughts that you have for listeners that you think they should keep at the top of their minds when they think about regional and international mechanisms?
I think, you know, in terms of, you know, key highlights one would be to, you know, tailor your advocacy also to the different mechanisms, you know, identify their specificities, their strengths, their weaknesses, and also find out more about your country's engagement with these mechanisms. You know, the commitments that have already been made in these fora, the partners involved. You know, you can build on existing work that has already happened, or existing platforms of engagement. And I mean, there is always already, you know, a strong base that exists and we can build on. So it's not necessarily about, you know, reinventing the wheel and you know, do things from the start again, but actually using existing knowledge platforms, you know, from civil society, for example, these coalitions, you know, there are a lot of coalitions on working on children's rights and on, you know, following up on, you know, recommendations from mechanisms, from UN human rights mechanisms, to really, you know, track implementation. So we can build on these platforms to maximize, you know, impact. So it's important to have a holistic approach, as I said before, when engaging with these mechanisms, and, you know, to use them also in to reinforce each other in a way. For example, you know, the Universal Periodic Review and the CRC reporting process. I mean, these two mechanisms are quite similar, but they are also, I mean, they have their specificities, as I mentioned before. So we need to, you know, it can save a lot of time and resources as well to actually, you know, look at issues that you know you have highlighted in one mechanisms and reuse them, reshape them, and tailor them to another mechanism, and build on what exists already. So this is yeah, off the top of my mind what comes to me, but I don't know if Esther or Olivia wants to add something.
I would say one recommendation also is to not be afraid to share any work they're doing or you're doing. Sometimes it's also, it opens doors with EU delegation, or even for us, if we're not aware of what's going on in the country office, we don't necessarily see opportunities which might actually be existing here in Brussels. So.
Yeah, and to build on what Olivia said, I mean, so don't hesitate to really reach out to us. But also, I guess it depends also on capacity of the country offices. Do your own small strategies as well. Do your power analysis about, you know, the actors with whom you would like or you need to engage in your countries, either national governments, other donors, you know, that in that exercise, I think the offices we can definitely support you in, you know, preparing these strategies and so on.
Okay, great, guys. I think that's been excellent overview. I agree with you, Esther. We could have much longer, Olivia. We could have much longer conversations about the different mechanisms. There's a lot of depth behind each of them, and perhaps that's something we will pursue in future.
Okay.
Thank you to everybody for participating in this call. I've put in a link to the OneNet page on the advocacy offices, and you'll find some information about what those offices are focused on, as well as contact people there. Again, if you have some of the regional entities, your regional office is often a good starting point for linkages there. And for information on doing your policy analysis and identifying your targets and your stakeholders, do take a look at the online module. There are some dedicated modules on stakeholder analysis, on policy and process analysis, as well as of course, the module on regional and international mechanisms. So thank you, Diarra, Esther, Olivia, for your time. It's been excellent having this opportunity. And we will edit this recording and load it up onto the OneNet page, so that please encourage other staff to take a look at it, or if you'd like to go back just to get a sense of what was discussed again, that would also be excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a lovely afternoon, morning, and evening.
Thank you.